Our next guest says Bashar al-Assad is facilitating the extremists who are crucifying and killing civilian Syrians. He also says the regime continues to use chemical weapons with impunity. Ubay Shabanda is a senior advisor to the president of the Syrian opposition coalition. He joins us now from Washington. It's so hard for us as journalists to tell the true story because we don't have access to these areas. We have to rely on what comes out from civilians. But this support that they're giving the extremists, as you argue it, what evidence do you have for that?
Well, there have been some serious allegations that have recently come to light on the relationship, the facilitatory relationship between the Assad regime and elements of al-Qaeda's offshoots in Syria, in particular the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. You have a tactical relationship of mutual benefit between al-Qaeda and the regime. We've had many instances in which al-Qaeda's forces that are present in the oil fields in eastern Syria have provided that oil in exchange for cash to the regime. We have many instances in which the Assad regime has purposely released al-Qaeda extremists from its prisons so that they can operate in Syria. And we have many instances where the Assad regime continues to refuse to attack the headquarters of al-Qaeda in the city of Raqqa and elsewhere in eastern Syria, choosing instead to drop barrel bombs on Syrian children and to drop chlorine gas attacks on women and children in northern Syria. So these allegations are also part of what we believe is a long-standing operational relationship between elements of the Assad regime's intelligence and security apparatus and al-Qaeda in Iraq, which was present in Syria, by the way, prior to the revolution. So this is a historical relationship between Bashar al-Assad and international extremists and al-Qaeda's forces in Syria.
You mentioned the chlorine gas there. At least 3 chlorine gas attacks are alleged to have taken place in western Syria in recent weeks. The first on the 11th of April in the northwestern town of Kafar Zaita. The following week, that same town was allegedly struck again. A third reported attack came in April the 21st, further north in the town of Talmeens. In each case, witnesses say the chlorine bombs were dropped by helicopters. Now, if you're right about this relationship between the regime and al-Qaeda, what's the deal there? Because look at it from the regime's point of view. If they get through this process, end the civil war, what deal have they offered al-Qaeda? I mean, do they, in the long term, want to be associated with them? That's an enormous risk, isn't it?
It's an enormous risk, and the Syrian people are paying the price. It's an alliance of mutual convenience.
Getting from it, what deal have they done with them? What's the logic from your point of view?
The logic is very simple. Al-Qaeda is attacking the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian people in the liberated territories. It is not attacking the Assad regime, especially in northern Syria. The greatest threat that the Syrian people face in many of these parts is not Assad, actually, but al-Qaeda.
But why can't Assad do that himself? Why can't the regime do it themselves? Why are they having to rely on al-Qaeda?
Because these areas have been liberated for a very long time, and it allows the regime to consolidate its forces. The regime is facing a manpower shortage. They've lost a significant amount of territory, and so this allows the regime to concentrate its forces, especially around the capital, and to give them enough time to go into the liberated areas in the future. So it's not only a strategic relationship, but it's also an operationally convenient relationship of mutual benefit to al-Qaeda and the Assad regime.
We were talking earlier about how perhaps Syria has fallen away from the headlines a bit. Are you finding that in Washington it's a tougher sell when you're trying to get in to speak to politicians and your country is suffering so much?
Actually, it's interesting. The American people are starting to realize the true nature of the Assad regime. Just the other day, Congress, the Congressional Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, passed 2 very important resolutions that would hold the Assad regime accountable for its crimes, and that would also called upon the administration, the White House, to take additional pressure to put on the regime so the regime does not act with impunity. What is happening today is that there's greater recognition here in Washington and amongst the broader American public that the Assad regime is instituting a systemic policy to wipe out the Syrian people in order to remain in power. So we are seeing politicians mobilizing. We are seeing the first steps here in Washington, in Congress, in passing these important resolutions to hold the regime accountable for what is clearly war crimes, what is clearly genocide. And we are seeing American support. The American support is there. The Syrian people are asking for more to help them defend against not only Bashar al-Assad, but to help the Syrian people defend themselves against al-Qaeda that has been facilitated by the Assad regime in Syria.
Ube Shabanda, thank you very much indeed for joining us.